Poppies is a 2009 poem by Jane Weir, who is both a poet and a textile artist. And this means that running throughout the poem are images taken from that domain of textiles, of fabrics, of design. And as with Kamikaze, the last poem that we looked at, this is another poem where the perspective isn't of a soldier or someone directly involved in the combat. Whereas that was the daughter of the Japanese fighter pilot, here we get the perspective of a mother who is sending her child out into battle. It's quite an elliptical, ambiguous poem. It doesn't tell us exactly what the situation is. It allows us, as readers of the poem, to sort of deduce, and from the feelings, from the atmosphere and the tone of the poem and the nature of the image, it allows us to kind of speculate on the exact nature of the events within the poem. I'll just guide you through each stanza, and we begin in a very conversational tone, 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies have already been placed on individual war graves. The poppy, of course, the universal symbol of remembrance, and we have imagery of death, we have imagery of grief, and the poppy and the graves used to memorialise those who died in conflict. Before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel. Now, who is leaving, why they're leaving, this is one of those areas that's left very ambiguous by the poem. Is this a son going off into battle, or, as some of the imagery suggests, is this a child leaving to go to school? It's left with that ambivalence very much. I pinned one onto your lapel. Crimped petals, spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias, binding around your blazer. Again, the blazer, is it the uniform of the military? Is it the uniform of education? The imagery, a blockade, disrupting, and particularly spasms, violent imagery, kind of painful imagery of the familiar paper poppy. But is it being pinned on, as I say, the military uniform or the school uniform? We do not know. Into the second stanza, and that ambiguous imagery continues. Sellotape bandaged around my hand, I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could, smoothed down your shirt's upturned collar, steeled the softening of my face. Go the first lines of this particular stanza. And again, it's a familiar, homely image. It's someone, taking hers, removing hers off a uniform to make it look a bit smarter. But notice the imagery, that verb bandaged, rounded up, imagery of conflict, imagery of war, and even the juxtaposition of steeled the softening of my face. Steel and soften, hard and soft. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. This, of course, suggests a sense of nostalgia, a sense of innocence of childhood already having gone, perhaps suggesting that this is an older child leaving, an older son leaving, or even, leaving to go off to war. But the graze my nose, even that familiar gesture of affection, is touched by a sense of pain and conflict. I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled black thorns of your hair. Again, a spiky haircut, but the imagery is painful. The imagery suggests conflict. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt, slowly melting. And the felt here, like the yellow bias round the blazer, the language of textiles, that other field that Jane Weir practices in, slowly melting. I was brave as I walked with you to the front door. Notice here, bravery isn't just demanded of those immediately involved in conflict, and of course it is demanded of them as well, but it's demanded of those left behind. It's demanded of the mothers. Contextually, it's said that it's thought that Jane Weir was inspired by the story of Wilfred Owen, the famous First World War poet, whose mother found out that her son had died on Armistice Day, I believe, just as tragically, just as the war was ending. Wilfred Owen died, and his mother got to hear that news. So bravery demanded of the family, those who love those who go off to war. To the front door, threw it open, the world overflowing like a treasure chest. So a simile here. Notice the enjambment as well, overflowing like a treasure chest. The world out there beyond is, something to be admired, something wonderful. A split second and you were away, intoxicated. So this child or this son is going off into the world really, elated with everything that is to come. Meanwhile, the mother stays at home just with her grief. And as this third stanza continues on line 25, after you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. So she uses this metaphor of the song coming out, something that's been trapped in there, her feelings that she can now, alone, in the child's own bedroom, articulate and release. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this is where it has led me. That single dove, like the poppy, is a symbol of remembrance, the dove, a symbol of peace, a symbol of hope. It's led me skirting the churchyard walls, my stomach busy, making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless, without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarf, gloves. Again, that juxtaposition of imagery of textiles, of sewing and design, tucks, darts, pleats, etc. And yet they are reminding us of the feelings, the way her feelings dart around, this surge of emotions that this woman is experiencing as she's been led to the churchyard. Of course, a place full of graves, a place where you would remember. And the imagery of war, reinforcements of scarf and gloves. I mean, she's simply describing what it feels to be cold, but her mind, as if to suggest to us, her mind is preoccupied by thoughts of war. It is that imagery that she draws upon. Into the final stanza. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscriptions of the memorial, leaned against it like a wishbone. Getting very visual imagery there of her, this woman against the stone, but the wishbone, suggesting the hope, suggesting, the pain that she's been through. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. Something that ornaments, of course, just to make it look better, but is there a sense of futility there? If something is merely ornamental, is it suggesting it doesn't have any purpose that goes beyond looking good? I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. And again, a very, very ambiguous ending to the poem. Is this a child who's at school? Is it just that, that the voice carrying from the schoolyard that she's listening for? Or is this suggesting a sense that this child has gone to war and is still there fighting? Is it suggesting to us that this child is actually dead, and that painful nostalgia, that sense of longing there, is for a child that has fully been taken away from its mother forever? The poem doesn't disclose these things, and that's one of the things that gives it its power, that sense of ambiguity and ambivalence, and the way it keeps us guessing and uncertain to the very end. So that was Poppies by Jane Weir, and this is just me strolling through some kind of weird animated scene which I could become trapped in forever, it seems. So, bye-bye.